Hey everybody, so back again today with just some review of the game I played earlier today. Uh, it was an interesting game. Um, were definitely instructive moments in it. If you have watched that video, you'll also see that it ended rather, at least as far as I'm concerned, anticlimactically. Which is to say, I had built up a good edge in the game, um, and this was a situation where, again, for maybe 20, 25 moves, let's just check this out actually. Let's see where we're at. Move 27. Yeah, for roughly 25 moves, I played with a just totally winning advantage. Um, and then I just had this just bizarre mouse slip. Like, it was really ridiculous. Um, you'll notice on the videos that when I make a move, I use the drag and drop feature. So I'll take a piece and I'll pick it up with the cursor and I'll move it and drag it and hold the left cursor button down. It's also the case though if you click on a piece and then you click on another square, that will move the piece as well, like this. Um, but yeah. Um, so what happened is I evidently clicked on the bishop um, here in this position. I clicked on the bishop, and then I tried to do a bunch of like arrows. I was doing a bunch of arrow drawing, and I guess I probably didn't realize that I'd clicked on the bishop, or if I had realized it, I definitely forgot it. And then I clicked on this e4 such that instead of dragging it and dropping it, which is what I would do if I was trying to make the move, it did this deal. It went like that. So again, I clicked this square, F3, and then I made a bunch of arrow draws like this, and then or something. I don't know. I clicked the square F3 and I didn't realize it, and then I clicked the square E4. So yeah, I mean that was a massive gift to my opponent. Really frustrating for me, as you guys saw in the video. I posted it nevertheless because it was a good game, and I don't want to just sort of be accused of only posting games where I win. I mean, stuff like this happens. Like, we have mouse slips. It's incredibly frustrating, especially when you have a totally winning position. You've been playing the game for like 40 minutes or whatever it is, and then for it to just blow up like that. So yeah, if you guys have had those situations too, I feel you. That's just really frustrating. But in any case, stepping back from that, because that was just sort of a weird quirk that has to do with the result, and I'm really doing this to try to use have it be a learning experience for everybody, for myself, for you guys, and the learning comes with looking at the actual game itself, not the weird quirky thing that happened at the end, and that definitely was frustrating for me. So if we look at the overview here of the game itself, uh, I mean, some interesting things I guess come to mind. So again, we got the horizontal line. Whenever the graph is above, that means white is winning. Whenever it's below, that means black is winning. And what you'll notice is that for the last half of the game, basically, I was just totally winning. Um, and so that I think that's my first takeaway from this game is like I pretty much got an advantage up until roughly here. And we'll talk about this move here. But I got an advantage, and especially when I got to this point, I got this advantage, and then I just kept it. And I'm very happy with that. Again, had I not had the quirky, just random blunder, I mean, mouse slip, not even intentional blunder at the end, yeah, this would have just been a situation where I carried the victory the whole way. So if I can play like that, if I can get an advantage and hold it to the end, I'm very happy with how I played. So in general, I'm happy with how I played in this game, despite the mouse slip at the end. Second thing I would notice is my opponent had 3 inaccuracies, 3 mistakes. I had 3 inaccuracies, and then of course it counts my mouse slip as a blunder. So really the way I look at this is, according to the engine analysis, I had 3 inaccuracies, and had this blunder not been there, I would estimate it would say that my accuracy score was between like 95 and 98, but this one big blunder was so massively huge in changing the evaluation that it skewed the whole accuracy thing. So again, basically having 3 inaccuracies, I'm pretty happy with the play there too. And the last thing that I would notice about the graph here before we get into the game itself is the opening roughly goes up till about this stage-ish. Yeah, I mean, sort of however you want to demarcate it. And if you look at the graph before that point, there's not a lot of switch in the advantage. And, you know, in this game, I didn't play 100% accurately in terms of like following theoretical moves. It was in a line in the advance that I'm not is versed on. The advanced French that I'm not as versed on. And so I knew generally what I wanted to do, but we'll see when we get in the openings that, you know, I sort of messed up the move order a little bit, but it didn't knock anything out of, you know, it didn't put me in a horrible situation. Again, to the point that I've made before, the really interesting stuff, especially at our level, again, roughly 2,000 and less, happens in the middle game and the end game. I mean, we hear a lot about openings, and I think people just frankly spend too much time on openings. I mean, unless you're a professional or you're spending like 8-10 hours a day at chess, I mean, I think there's better things that you can spend your time in terms of what's going to give you the best sort of payback. So with that being said, let's jump into the game itself. I've taken down a few points in the game where I just want to call attention to, and we'll sort of go through it. So let's jump to the opening book first and sort of see what we've got. So we had a advanced French. I'm going to just go through these moves really quick. And then I played bishop d7. It's a move that I've been playing in this kind of situation recently, just to kind of steer away from the super main line queen b6. But bishop d7 too is pretty main line. Also, black here can play knight g to e7 and knight to h6 as well. They can also take on d4. But yeah, bishop d7. They played bishop e2, and then I played the 5th most common move. And so this is where I wasn't quite sure. I thought about knight g to e7. I knew I was going to play that at some point. It just seemed very clogging up of the structure at this point, but it's the most common move, so it's probably the mainest of main line here. So if we just follow that out, I think I followed this out in a line here. Yeah, knight g to e7, knight to a3, trades on d5, or d4, sorry. So that's your main line in case you're interested. But yeah, so I played c takes d4, and they recaptured, and then I played knight g to e7. If we jump back here in the openings book, so knight to a3 is the most common move. They didn't do that. I played the most common move here. I know from general opening ideas around this opening that I was supposed to play knight f5 at some point. And then this move bishop e3 came on the board, and this is probably about where we'll jump out of the openings book, because not a lot of games after this position. And then I went ahead and took on e3, which it says is totally fine. It also suggests f6. So I was glad to see that this was a decent move, even though it's opening up their rook. I mentioned that I had played another game recently where I hesitated doing this, and yeah, basically because of that previous game, in a similar kind of position, not the same position, because the computer was like, yeah, you seriously should take on e3, I just went ahead and did it. So f takes e3, bishop e7, knight c6, and then I played a6, which is generally a good idea in this kind of position, just stopping white from bringing their minor pieces in, which can be annoying in some variations. Computer says it's not absolutely best. It says castling is marginally better, but again, at our level, the difference between 0.23 and dead even is there's not much there. So white plays a3. I castle now. Bishop d3. And now I know in the French, f6 is a move I probably want to play just to kind of do away with some of the crampedness that my pieces are feeling. But Computer here also says, rook c8 is a move you could consider as well. So queen c2. And then here, this is where I played f6 and then f5 in the game. I said in the game that this was, had I made a mistake playing f6 previously, and now it looks like f5 is something I have to do. If you look at the computer's suggestions here, it does say f5 is the best move. It also suggests h6, and in the line with h6 is something like this. But yeah, I didn't like all these light square weaknesses that I had in this variation, so I kind of just steered away from it. And I'm fine with that. Okay, so then they retreated, knight to e1. I played rook to c8, just lining up with their queen and introducing possible tactical ideas. They got out of that, immediately, which is definitely understandable. Knight a5 is best. And then I jumped the knight in. And this was a point where, so I played rook takes c4. Computer says d takes c4 is slightly better, only marginally, but I think this is instructive, even though the difference between the two moves here on a pure evaluation basis is marginally different. I think this d takes c4 idea, as opposed to the rook takes c4 idea, is worth pointing out because it's sort of a theme that comes up a little bit later. And it's this idea of just advancing my pawns while capturing. And eventually, I can push. I've got this majority now on the queen side, and that can be an asset. So keeping that kind of idea in mind, I think, is useful in terms of an instructive moment. So so I did recapture with the rook. Sorry. So they captured my knight. I played knight c4. They captured my knight, and then I recaptured. And then they brought their queen back over to d2. And I played queen c7. I think, yeah, it was the move before. So computer here says queen b6 is best. I think it was the move before this that I was suggesting queen b6. Let's see. Was it here? Was it? No, maybe it was here that I was suggesting queen b6 as opposed to knight c4. Let's see what the computer says about queen b6 in this position. So queen e2. Okay, so what did I play? Knight c4, which it says is minus 0.89. Queen b6. This says queen b6 is fine, but yeah, knight c4 was just significantly better, as it turns out. And again, the idea of queen b6 here was that I was threatening to take the knight because the pawn is pinned to the loose. Well, I guess the rook wasn't even loose. I didn't even see the bishop. So yeah, that doesn't have a lot of bite to it at all then. So yeah, I'm glad I steered away from that move. Okay, so yeah, let's go back to the game. Knight c4 captures, rook captures. I probably should have captured with the pawn. Queen d2, and now I played queen c7. And here, I played this because, again, I was thinking of these kind of ideas. I've had a tough time in the past just noticing in practical games this idea of an overloaded pawn, like white has got here. So I'm glad I noticed it in this game. Again, my idea was to line up here and to also have something lining up against here and create tactical problems. So they played this move. I lined up on c3 again, and they didn't do anything to address what I thought was my threat of taking here. But as we can see, the computer says this is actually an inaccuracy. It's an inaccuracy if white doesn't do the most obvious thing, which is what my opponent did. Um, but instead, if white goes ahead here and plays knight takes d5 in response. So I've won a pawn on a3, they've won a pawn on d5, and then we get a line that sort of looks like this. And it's pretty even. Nothing to write home about. I'm not winning a pawn as I thought I was. And because really with best play there, black is not winning a pawn, computers suggest moves like bishop e8 as being better, or maybe a5. A5, I guess the idea is maybe clamping down, trying to clamp down with a4 possibly in some lines on white structure. Bishop e8 is probably playing off the idea that in some variations the bishop might come out here. This bishop in the French defense, of course, is anybody who's played the French is well aware, can be problematic because of all these pawns on light squares. So I guess this move the computer was thinking is, just giving the bishop scope. The lines don't immediately suggest the bishop coming out here, but at least it gives the bishop the possibility to, and in that way it's sort of an improvement of the position. But in any case, I played bishop takes a3, and again, computer says white's reaction here, b takes a3, was inaccurate because that just played right into my hands. I win a pawn, capture their knight. They interpose their knight between my queen's defense of the rook and the rook itself. So I capture, they capture. And then I played this move b6, thinking I was like winning a piece and not seeing these backward knight retreats. But computer still says b6 is best. Probably just want to get the opponent's pieces out of your general area. Says white made a mistake here retreating the knight to b3, and that instead they should have done something like this. Queen to d3, queen to b7. King comes up to protect this weak point. And then we get a position like this. So in this position, black is up a pawn, but with queens on the board and with black having a bad bishop, it'll be tough to convert, but computer says still -1 for white. So basically, or for black. Black basically has the advantage that amounts to his extra pawn, and he's definitely the one for choice here. So this would have been better than what white had in the game, which is what they had after knight b3. And at this point, black has a totally winning advantage, -2.78. So I get out of the way, and then they go up to c3. I was happy to see that the computer really liked this move. Just for a while in my progression in chess, these kind of moves were hard for me to see as well. Like these rook advances when you have an opposing rook on the same file, and it just looks like the two sides just are waiting to capture each other. Seeing the possibilities of advancing your rook to an advantageous square, such that if it's recaptured, then you could do something good by, in this case, recapturing with the knight, or recapturing with the pawn and hitting this knight and gaining a tempo there. So yeah, I was glad to see that was good. And then computer says that queen c1 is another mistake. I guess probably the idea is, so computer says that white needs to play like knight c1, which again, hard for any human to see. But I guess the idea is that if there's a capture by white and I recapture, it's not hitting the knight with tempo. I'm sure there's something else to that, but yeah, opponent played a pretty human move, and it turns out to be pretty bad for them. Computer says queen c8 is slightly better, but either move is totally winning here. And this is to the point that I brought up earlier of saying, hey, don't shy away from taking away or taking with the pawn here. A lot of us, when we get an advantage, so in this case black has an extra pawn, you just want to trade all the pieces off and try to play with your pawn advantage. And oftentimes that can be okay, but also in a practical game, where in this game, I was it could be the case that leaving the queens on the board and having a game that could end a lot quicker because the queens are on the board might be better than having an end game where you're going to have to make a lot of moves over the same amount of time, and you just might run out of time because you're going to end up making a lot of moves. Those kind of issues, practical issues, are things to think about if you're a person who often gets into time trouble. If you're like me in that regard, it's something I'm trying to get better at. But also, it just says objectively here, this is better. And I've noticed with the computer that it often seems to suggest not trading queens is better. That's an interesting fact. And like in so many situations, even in textbook situations of, hey, you're up material, just trade everything off. Oftentimes the computer's just like, no, don't trade queens off. So I don't know what to make of that. But I think it possibly suggests that maybe we should reconsider our intuitions when we have the chance to trade queens. But in any case, I did go for the queen trade. So rook takes c4, queen takes c4, queen takes c4. And then we'll point out a few interesting things about this endgame. So they retreat their knight, and my advantage here is definitely these pawns against this. And so strategically, I just want to run these guys up the board. And I mentioned something to this effect, but maybe didn't fully appreciate it, especially so the computer likes this move, getting the bishop on the long diagonal, hitting g2, so gaining, or not necessarily gaining a tempo, but having the king not just be able to run away without protecting g2. So let's get this stuff out of here. Here, computer says king f7 maybe not necessary. And I remember in the game, I was kind of a little wishy-washy about what to do here. Should I bring my king up? Do I need to get going on the queen side? Computer says, yeah, getting going on the queen side is possibly better. And so here's a sample line. So just, again, for context, the move I played, black is still totally winning, so it's not like it's a blunder or something, but this would have been better. Again, just a sample line. So again, here the king still comes up, but we've included these sort of threats over here on the queen side that white has to do something about. Now they've moved their knights an awkward square on the edge of the board. And then black brings their king up over on the king side and sort of has this idea of creating past pawn threats over on this side of the board that white has to deal with, and then trying to open a new front over here on the king side. I think that's the general thrust of the computer suggestions here. And it's something that I mentioned in the game too, that I said strategically this is sort of what I'm trying to do. I don't know how well I executed it outside of, again, the just really irrelevant mouse slip I had. That was the idea though. Create pass pawns to preoccupy white on the queen side and then try to do something on the king side. So again, this is the sample line from the computer. So it's an interesting position you get to as a result of all this, right? So black is up 2 pawns here. White is going to try to create counterplay with this, but with the knight in defense, they're not going to have enough. And as the computer suggests here, this is just totally winning for black. But again, I played king f7, not a huge error or anything. And then I got going on the queen side. And this was an instructive point, I think, as well. So I wanted to, again, sometimes we get a little anxious just in general in playing chess, and especially in the endgame. Oftentimes we don't need to rush. Just leaving this tension here, not sort of pushing b4, but letting black know, hey, they've got to account for this. is probably an instructive point for me that I take away from the computer suggestion that playing b4 here is inaccurate. If I leave my pawns like this, if white ever goes like this, then I've got this. Yeah, I mean, just in retrospect, this just really feels like it's tying white down even more, in creating less weakness for me as well, which is possibly something that hindered my advance later in the game. Is I had these two pawns here, but my question always was, how could I advance them without them becoming weak? So yeah, interesting little nuance there. But yeah, I played b4, they took, I recaptured, and now I've got these two pawns that are taking all these entry squares away from the king. So that's cool for the time being. Yeah, I mentioned in the game that I thought white had to play this way, against which I was going to do this. So we got, so I was going to play b3, and yeah, computer says that, again, black is still totally winning, but maybe that's white's best way to go. I said in the game that maybe I was playing these moves a little too fast, but yeah, engine approved, so I'm happy with that. Bishop e4, I come in this way. Yeah, here computer says don't even worry about white's attack, here on g5, just get going with your pawns. And this was an interesting point that I guess I didn't really appreciate until I saw this analysis, was that I had a lot of opportunity to get these pawns going. And basically it's centered around the fact that if white ever got their king, say, to this square in this kind of configuration, one, in this particular case, this pawn is protected. But two, their king is never going to be able to take, because this pawn is just going to queen, especially when the knight is this far over here. So it's a really interesting sort of tactical threat point in the endgame that was instructive for me, and I just wanted to highlight. So I played king g6. They retreated their knight. I didn't even, again, need to retreat. I could have just done this. Again, I was afraid of moving these pawns, but this analysis really shows that no need, because the knight is a really bad defender, especially when my bishop is in here, and this king is not going to ever be able to take the pawn in the rear, because the front pawn is going to queen. So h takes g5, h takes g5. The knight comes in. So king h5, it says, is fine. Bishop g2 is best. King c2. And then I decided to come all the way back to my king. Computer here says, nah, you don't need to do that. These are little nuances. Again, we're talking about a difference between -7 and -8. But, it is what it is. So I brought my king all the way back around, just trying to support the king side. We had this sort of change of the structure a little bit. And I played this move, king b4 here, or king b5, but I didn't need to, because this king and this pawn are holding down the advance of these three pawns, and I probably should have left it as it was. So in this situation, let's see. So they say king b5, but bishop e2. I noticed in this analysis, so it's suggesting bishop e2 here. This bishop coming over to this diagonal and possibly putting a check if the king comes here, and I've got the king here, my black king here. This seemed to be a recurrent theme that I didn't fully appreciate in the game, as a little nuance that was going to help me break through. And we'll see that idea coming up here. But again, instead of bishop e2, instead of that, in this position, I played king b5, which was, again, totally fine. -10, still totally winning. And this is where I had the mouse slip, right? Really an unfortunate way to end a game that otherwise, I had played, pretty well at, a game that I was on the whole really happy with. Just as a sample of how the win could have been converted, again, is this idea of c3. just pushing the pawn forward and not worrying about, you know, the way that it kind of opens up holes, which is sort of was my vague concern about getting too quick on advancing them, but not an issue. So again, this is the computer line. King comes back to stop the pawn. The rear pawn tries to hold the king at bay. And then there's this move. If the knight captures here, then yeah, black's got 4 passed pawns, and white king has no chance there. So the king comes back there to b3. The bishop retreats. The bishop and the king are gonna hold these pawns at bay. At this point, black has got 4 passed pawns, and this is just totally done. So just as an example, I had 6 minutes on the clock. I hope I would have found something like this. I want to say that I'm pretty confident I would have found some solution. I don't know if it would have been this solution precisely, but yeah, I gotta watch it in the future, drawing these arrows and making sure that I don't left click on a piece and then click another square, which would be a legal move. So yeah, sorry to leave you guys with that sort of bit of anticlimax, but otherwise I hope you did get something out of the game. I thought it was instructive. I thought it was a really good example of you know, continuing to stay vigilant. Again, I played with a massive advantage for like 25 moves or whatever it was, but you don't win a game until you've won it, or until you make a horrible mouse slip. So a good testament to that, and my opponent, you know, just kept pushing me, so credit to them as well. You know, put themselves in a situation where if something weird appeared on the board, you know, they could take advantage. And you know, to their fortune, I had the mouse slip. So outside of that, again, hope you guys got something out of the game. Let me know in the comments, and probably be making another rapid game video here soon. Fingers crossed, no like ridiculous mouse slips or anything like that next time. Anyway, until then, have a good night, you guys. Thanks. Bye.